Hello, everyone. Welcome to my webinar on interceptions from the perspective of evolutionary astrology. This is an EA Zoom meeting that's taking place October 3rd, 2019. So what we're going to do is we're going to move in and look at a few slides of theory or basic information, and then we're going to use a chart example with a volunteer. So first of all, from the perspective of most traditional astrology, they have taught over time that intercepted signs are basically suppressed archetypes, and we need extra effort to be able to express that archetype and manifest it in our life. And if there are any planets then that are in those intercepted signs, they have pretty much the same interpretation. Those intercepted planets are suppressed. They can't manifest themselves. They can't be out there where we can see them, live them, express them in whatever ways. This is different from the perspective of evolutionary astrology. So it is possible that the traditional perspective may be accurate, but it's also possible that it could be something else. And I just want to state to everyone that evolutionary astrology is always based upon observation and correlation. If you have been a practicing astrologer for any length of time, you probably have run into those situations anytime you want to project that archetype onto someone and you get their actual feedback. It can manifest in a different way than what you assume. And so again, this is why it's always observe and correlate. And so from EA's perspective, we teach that intercepted signs and any planets there could possibly have been highly developed in previous incarnations. And so there's no need for them to be emphasized in this lifetime, and they are easy to express and manifest them however they are in any specific chart. And I would like to point out that any house system will work that uses intercepted signs. And the major three house systems are Porphyry, Coke, and Placidus, in which you actually come up with the intercepted signs. And so let's dive into some of the two basic principles from EA in which we look at this. And so when we have a chart in front of us and we see the two intercepted signs, every once in a while there will actually be four intercepted signs in the chart of someone who is born near high or low altitudes. But when you see intercepted signs, you're also going to see both signs that are opposite each other on the zodiacal wheel. So there's not one intercepted sign, there's always two, and rare exceptions there can actually be four intercepted signs. So the first thing you're going to do is say, where are the planetary rulers of those intercepted signs, and how many aspects do they have? And if you start to see those two planetary rulers for each of those signs with multiple aspects, that's going to start to lead you to the pondering that perhaps those archetypes were highly developed in past lives. Now, in my 30 plus years of working with evolutionary astrology, there have become three planetary archetypes, two planets, 1 point, that if I see them, I almost immediately start to dig in that these intercepted signs have been active before. The first one is the sun, the ruler of one of the intercepted signs. And of course, sun rules Leo. So in this case, you would see the sun, you would see the signs of Leo and Aquarius intercepted somewhere in the chart. Why do I say this? Because the sun is the center of the solar system, and its archetype is life force, creative self-actualization. Just think, where would we be without the sun in our life? It just wouldn't even exist in any form on planet Earth. And so, again, sun is a pretty dynamic planetary archetype when it comes to looking at the chart. And if you see it ruling in the intercepted sign Leo, you can almost always, it will almost always lead you to that those intercepted signs were quite active in past lives. And if that's the case, then wherever the sun exists in the chart with all of its multiple aspects, all of that will have some way of quite easily being understood and expressed. That creative self-actualization really tends to go forward. The soul knows its personality, it knows its creativity, and it has an ease of being able to express it in whatever way the archetypes lead it to do so. The other one that I will look at is Pluto. And if you have any studies in evolutionary astrology, you know that we consider Pluto to be representative of the soul. By sign generation, by individual house, the individual personal soul nature that we come into for security reasons. So does Pluto rule an intercepted sign? In that case, it's going to be Scorpio. Pluto is ruled by Scorpio. And so then you're going to see the intercepted signs naturally be Scorpio and Taurus. And so if we have Pluto ruling a sign and we're looking at that generational energy, that archetype, again, specifically to Scorpio here, is going to be highly developed in past lives in some way. And then again, it's easily understood, expressed, go forward with life, and the soul, it won't be quite as unconscious perhaps for souls that do not have Scorpio intercepted when they have Pluto in Scorpio. Now, we have a Pluto and Scorpio generation here born between 1983, 84, and 1995. So we got some young souls on the planet here, most of them in their early 20s to early 30s. And so not all of them, again, are going to have Scorpio Taurus intercepted in their chart. When it is something that you're going to want to observe and correlate. And for instance, Pluto ruling Scorpio, if it has lots of aspects as that planetary ruler, it will, again, lead you to observe if there is an easy expression of all that. Common example of this for, in general, for probably all Pluto Scorpios, but even more emphasized sometimes with Pluto in Scorpio intercepted in a house, these would be souls that will be so attuned to the life and death issues and circumstances, not just for themselves, but for their all souls and all species on planet Earth that are coming from climate change these days. And then the next thing that I will have a tendency to look at when it comes to intercepted signs, do the rulers, if you have intercepted signs, are the rulers in the nodal axis, or does the nodal axis rule those intercepted signs? And let's go back to the example of Taurus and Scorpio. Do we have the nodal axis rulers in Taurus and Scorpio? That would mean, do we have Venus ruler of Taurus and Pluto ruler of Scorpio with the nodal axis? And if we do, then here again, another clue that whatever egoic, emotional, karma, dharma, south node, north node we have, it's quite possible that it was highly developed in past lives and therefore is not suppressed and has an ease of expression. Now, there's always that emotional tension between the south node, north node, or clinging to our emotional past and moving forward emotional. It can still be quite active in the current life, and even more active if there is that relationship with the intercepted signs. Just so happens that this is going to be the example we will use with our chart volunteer today. So I'll work with that in more specific detail with you later on. But to just recap, when you have intercepted signs, are the planetary rulers of those two signs highly active by aspects. And if those planetary rulers are the Sun, Pluto, or the nodes, and the nodes are, then again, there can be more emphasis in that direction. The second principle that we will look at is, are there planets existing in those intercepted signs? If you have Gemini and Sag intercepted, and somebody has Venus and Mars in Gemini, and over on the other side they have Chiron in Gemini, well, there's three planets in those intercepted signs. That will then lead us into pondering, observe, correlate, that those planetary archetypes may have been developed in past lives, and they don't need an emphasis in this lifetime. Now, one of the clues then to understanding that, and this is another basic principle that always comes with evolutionary astrology, you observe, correlate, right there on your screen, the environmental conditionings. And in EA, this is parental, it's religious, societal, economical, it's all those, it's everything in our environment that we're raised with from our first breath through childhood, adolescence, and adulthood. And so if the chart in question, if that soul is giving you feedback about those planetary archetypes, and those archetypes seem to be quite active, then here again, observation correlation will show you those planets, even though they're in intercepted signs, they don't really need to be so much emphasized in this lifetime. They're still active. So we can do the same thing here with Sun, Pluto, and nodes. Does the Sun reside in an intercepted sign? If we go back to that example of Gemini and Sagittarius, does someone have Sun in Gemini? Does that Sun have a lot of aspects to it? That's going to lead you to understand then that they may not need any help in being able to express all the verbalization of Gemini with speaking, writing, and being the best debater in high school. The Sun can be in any archetype here because we're not looking at the Sun ruling. Well, we are looking at the Sun ruling. No, we're looking at the Sun being in that intercepted sign. We're not looking at it ruling one. Well, with the Sun, it can be either way. It can do both, excuse me, on that one. But you get the point here of what I'm speaking to is, again, Sun is, it's a strong archetype in the chart. It's our introduction to astrology for many of us when we get curious about our sun signs, and it is the life force for all of us on planet Earth. Now, does Pluto reside in an intercepted sign? And right now on planet Earth, that can be Pluto in Cancer, with Cancer Capricorn intercepted. It can be Leo Aquarius intercepted. It can be Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sag, Capricorn. Those are the Pluto generational, signs that are living souls on planet Earth right now. So when any of those polarities are intercepted, is Pluto there intercepted? And so here again, it can lead us to start to observe through that chart and that soul in question, how actively is it showing up in their life? They may understand it on a much deeper level than somebody else in their same Pluto generation. And they can also then understand whatever house archetype is involved on a very deep personal level. So point here again, if Pluto is intercepted in a sign and it exists in a house, you cannot assume that it doesn't have an intensity to it. Pluto always has intensity, but it may be even more emphasized, especially if Pluto has 4, 5, 6, 7 aspects to it. Now, the same is going to exist with the nodes. If we have intercepted signs, do the nodes exist in those signs and therefore houses? And this can go all the way through the 6 polarities, or 12 polarities if you want to do each one, north node, south node. You're getting what I'm going to say next? You have to observe and correlate and see how that is active in the person's life. And if there are several aspects to the nodes, then that's going to lead you to observe, understand that it may be highly developed. And there's no need for it to be it's no need for it to have an extra emphasis in this lifetime. We'll still have that tension between the emotional past and future that goes on, but it might be more active. And if it is more active, it's also possible both directions. The south node may be so active that they just keep trying to go back to the past, and it creates more and more intensity, asking them to move forward. But also that north node could be more active, and they could have perhaps an easier time moving forward on an egoic or emotional level with that north node. Again, especially the more aspects there may be. So, to recap, are there planets or the nodal axis in those intercepted signs? And the more there are, the more you might want to question how actively those are being expressed in any given chart. Now, it's possible that there can be none or just a few aspects to those planetary rulers. And it's possible that there might be no planets in those intercepted signs. And when that's the case, those traditional interpretations may still be accurate. It could be possible that those intercepted signs and their archetypes will need to be developed in this lifetime. However, bottom line, observe and correlate. And so you have those clues with the planetary rulers and any planets in intercepted signs that will help you then observe which spectrum is true. Suppression that needs to be actively developed, or an overexpression from past incarnations that easily expresses itself in this lifetime. And so the bottom line with that observation correlation then, as always, you interact with the soul in question, you look at its chart, and you look at all the environmental conditionings to then observe how those intercepted signs are expressing in the current lifetime. And so that's it for theory. We're going to move into chart example. And so if anybody has any questions, you're always welcome to interrupt me and ask. I don't mind at all. So if there is anything, I'll just go kind of slow and you can unmute yourself and ask any questions. Otherwise, we're going to move into a chart here. And I got my screens covering it up just for sake of recording, all right? This is a female, February 3rd, 1980, 10:46 a.m. in Plattsburgh, New York. Now I'm just going to read through this very briefly, and we'll go back and forth with these environmental conditionings through the next few slides and the rest of this webinar. This person feels like she is third stage individuated. Sometimes you don't always know that when you're first working with a client. She currently lives in Israel. She is in a 16-year non-married relationship, 2 children. She has 5 generations that are still living. Very close family. There's a mixture of beliefs, social, economic backgrounds. Many of her family members are or have been in the military. Democratic background. She can trace family roots back to the Mayflower and DAR, which is Daughters of the American Revolution, if you don't know what that is. This soul, however, does not feel that she relates to the country of origin where she was born, the United States, nor does she feel like she belongs in the current country, Israel, where she lives right now. Her mom was more spiritually based, but she was basically raised by maternal grandmother because mom started in with education and career as the children got older. She has an older and younger brother. Dad was extremely authoritarian. He had a career in the Air Force. Economically, she was taught money doesn't grow on trees, yet they did not practice what they preached because she saw all the material excess in the family. She makes her living currently doing a variety of freelancing, and she is an organizer for people when they move homes, move houses, that good old packing and unpacking. Historically, she had several long-term relationships, and it tended to be her that abruptly left and ended the relationships. So those are most of the bullet points that I observed from our volunteer in regards to her environmental conditionings. Now, as you can see by the red circles and by the way, I use Potpourri houses, and this volunteer graciously allowed me to do this. And so you see by those red circles, we have Aquarius intercepted in the 10th house, and we have Leo intercepted in the 4th house. You see that we have the Pluto and Libra generation. She is a Virgo soul with Pluto in the 6th house. You see South Node 29 Aquarius intercepted in the 10th. Leo, or North Node 29 Leo intercepted in the 4th. And you see they are separating squares with Uranus. We have Uranus square the nodes. You also see those 2 Aquarian planets up there. So I just want to now break this down for you, and how we're going to move through this is we're first of all going to look at the planetary rulers of these intercepted signs and see how active they are. You can look to your screen on the lower left, and for convenience sake, I just did waning and waxing. I did not put the phasal part of the aspect in. Saved a little typing, and again, just for sake of understanding. And we'll hear from our volunteer as well. I saw that she was on the call, so I thank you very much for being live with us all the way from Israel, honey. If you look at the planetary ruler of Aquarius, which is Uranus, you'll see that we have 5 planetary aspects and, of course, those squares to the nodal axis. That's pretty darn active. That alone, when I see that in the chart, even if I'm prepping the chart before I've gotten to the environmental conditionings, I'll go, I somehow think that intercepted sign was active in past lives. And so then I'll be curious to start trying to fill those types of things in. Now, if we look at that planetary ruler specifically, Uranus, you see that it's over there at about 25 degrees Scorpio in the 7th house, squaring the nodes. What is the environmental conditioning we've heard from this soul? Early on, she had several long-term relationships, but she was the one who would always cut it off for whatever reasons, unexpectedly, Uranus, and leave. And she is now in a long-term relationship, but living in Israel and all the Judaism over there, she has chosen not to marry her long-term partner with their children. For those of you who are not aware of this, the Uranus and Scorpio mini generation will easily lead us to question what kind of intimacy, Scorpio, trauma, we will find. We add on the 7th house, which is also a relationship chart, and together Scorpio and the 7th house will lead us to wonder what has been the relationship trauma for this soul in past lives that could quite easily, Reader's Digest version, as I like to say, perhaps be re-experienced in this lifetime. So possibly we could have a soul who's quite aware of trauma. And if we look at Uranus in a ruling Aquarius, and Aquarius being intercepted in the 10th house, did she draw in partners who were trying to be controlling of her? Or did she draw in partners in which she tried to have the upper hand for security reasons because of the rug getting ripped out underneath her feet prior lives? Did she have a mixture of both? So if I may, I would like to have our volunteer unmute ourselves, and could you give us some feedback? You're welcome to ask questions too.
Okay.
Hi.
Hello. I think I was the one who found myself in relationships that were secure, that left me in a secure. I'm not sure if it was, just financial security. That just happened upon that every relationship I had did bring financial security. I didn't consciously know that I was looking for that.
Mm-hmm.
But it did happen that way, yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so back to one of my prior questions, do you feel that you would choose, and I mean this, I mean no judgment, I mean no disrespect. Do you find that you perhaps chose partners who were not as aware or conscious of you so you could have a quote unquote upper hand and have more of the control in the relationship? Question.
Every relationship that I had was purely spontaneous out of pure love. Like I really felt a connection. There was no premeditated or any. There were people that I met in random places at random times, and connection was amazing.
So the scorpionic hypnotism, the hypnotic attraction. The point I'm getting at, because you're the Uranus, the ruler of that intercepted sign, is in the 7th house. The point I'm getting at, do you find that these prior relationships or even the current relationship was based on equality?
I guess not, no.
Sorry, I could have asked that more clearly to you. Yeah, and that would be, if we would look at just Uranus square the nodes, it skips steps with Scorpio 7th. It would be about searching for equality, that equal giving and receiving in relationships. And with those intercepted signs in the 4th or 10th, there would be a questioning of, was there a possibility that one person was taking on more of a parental role and the other partner was taking on more of the immature role? Again, exposing an inequality in the relationship. Was there any of that?
Not sure.
Think about it on an emotional level. Did you find that your partners would fulfill, be reciprocal? Was there reciprocity on an emotional level?
I think in different relationships, it's bounced back and forth. Both roles were played by both parties. I mean,
Sure. Point is, we can see that there's going to perhaps be a variety of the relationship scenarios between those patterns of inequality. We could also find that there could be those partners in which it was deeply passionate, or in which the partner just ended up being the friend, the Leo Aquarius. Point revolves back down to, relative to the specifics of this webinar, those intercepted signs were active in the past. That planetary ruler Uranus is quite active with 5 other planets, and we just focused on the nodes. You know, the trine to Venus, you know, some of the emotional ease going on. The sextile to Saturn, even though it's opposing Venus, there could have been some of that of financial security that you were talking about. Squares to Mercury, perhaps there were some communication issues in some of the relationships. Again, from this perspective of intercepted signs, that Aquarius was active. And I would say that, and I'll address more the South Node specifically in a future slide, okay? All right. But I would say with that Aquarius intercepted in the 10th house, in addition to the intimate relationships, there could be a lot within your soul that wanted to break free from some of the consensus conditionings of your familial environment. For instance, you were the only one that didn't join the military in a lot of your extended immediate family. And you were the one who perhaps didn't stay home or didn't stay close to the immediate family. You took off for, you know, the wild Aquarian adventure to find yourself wherever you wanted to go. If I'm saying anything you feel is not accurate, honey, please give me the feedback, okay?
No, you're right on.
And I'm not quite familiar with how long you have been studying evolutionary astrology. So if you would like to give any feedback, if you have any questions, you're more than welcome to speak up. If you want to give us any feedback on current relationship, please do so. Anything that you would like to say?
I'm still a newbie in evolutionary astrology. It's only been about a year for me, so I'm really still learning to crawl.
I understand. No worries. No worries at all. Anybody else who's participating live? Any comments or questions? I would also just point out that you see that Uranus is a waxing semi-sextile to Pluto, and you see that Uranus is a waning semi-sextile to Neptune. And we're all pretty familiar that Neptune is a waxing sextile to Pluto, no matter which Pluto-Neptune generations we are. It's been that way most of the last decade, still is the beginning, most of the last century, still is beginning of this century. However, that Uranus sandwiched into the midpoint, you know, a little bit of a wide orb, couple degrees between Neptune and Pluto, it leads me to believe that, and then they're in the 6th, 7th, and 8th houses. I have a tendency to believe or think that there's a lot of generational stuff that this soul is wanting to break free from. Those planets in the relationship houses, most of them relationship signs, and yet ruler Uranus going back to Aquarius at 10th. Remember what when she gave me the environmental conditionings, I don't know if I put the word in, but she said she specifically did not relate to the tribe in her country of origin, nor does she relate to the quote unquote tribe of the country she was born into. That is Aquarius intercepted in the 10th house. And so she has been expressing that. She's had the courage to break free and be that group of one. And so therefore, we can observe that perhaps she's been doing this for a few lifetimes, so that intercepted sign is active. All right, volunteer. Anything else you'd like to say in regards to Uranus or any of its aspects? You can be silent if there's nothing, because I'll sit.
Good. Give me some things to think about.
Sure, sure. Well, hey, let's move on to our next one. Now we're going to look at just the opposite. We're going to look at Leo intercepted in the fourth house, and its ruler is the sun. By the way, a lot of times what I will do when I will put up a chart, when I start to go into teaching a specific theory or principle with evolutionary astrology, I'll take out all the other planets or points to just help us hone in on what's active when we're looking. And so last slide, I just put the planets active to you, or an aspect to Uranus. This one, planets in aspect to the sun. And I'm checking my time here. And so we have, what is that? There are 5 aspects that the sun makes to other planets. Here's sun up in Aquarius, jumping ahead to one of the next slides. Mercury, I use wide orbs with conjunctions, and so Mercury is almost 10 degrees. I will still look at that as a new phase conjunction to the sun. The sun, I compare the sun to the outer planets. I compare Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars to the sun. I compare Jupiter, the sun, to the outer planets, Jupiter on out. So I look at the sun having a last quarter square to Uranus, and I look at the sun as having a waxing trine to Pluto, waxing sesquisquadrate to Saturn, and then both Moon and Mars have waning inconjuncts to the sun. So this alone is going to tell us that the intercepted sign Leo in the fourth house could quite possibly be very active in past lives, even though there isn't a planet that exists down there in that fourth house. If we look at Leo in the fourth house, and I'll give a couple of my theories, and then we'll hear from our volunteer again. Leo contained in the fourth house, these are 2 archetypes that will really have a fair amount to do with our early nurturing. You know, the fourth house is the nurturing parent, typically mom, but may not be so. Remember the environmental conditioning? She really didn't get a lot of nurturing from mom because mom went went to college and then pursued a career. But grandma was there, really giving her all of the early environment and maternal nurturing. So we know that that was there to some degree. We'll hear how she feels about this with mom in a little bit. Leo is an archetype where, well, let me back up. That fourth house is what we call emotional self-reliance. If we have that early nurturing, then we feel safe in our world. We feel emotionally safe. We learn to be responsible for meeting our own emotional needs. We're taught that in the early environment. That is not always typical. And if we don't learn that, then when we go to the archetype of the fifth house in Leo, we can act out what we did not have supplied in the early childhood. And that's where we hear those astrological words, well, the acting out and the drama queen, you know, the bottomless pit. No matter how much love, Leo, fifth house, I receive, it's not enough. Natural expression of Leo in the fifth house, especially if we have that support in the early environment, is we're go-getters creatively. We can sometimes, you know, be ahead of that game creatively. It just reminds me of my almost 10-year-old niece who has a very nurturing environment with parents and maternal grandparents. And she's very loving and all over the place, and creatively, there's nothing she won't try. I won't get into her chart that supports that, but the whole thing is she's a very outgoing, loving Leonian magnet for friends' child because of that support. And so that's how it exists generally. So as we start to look at all these aspects, though, and we see the inconjuncts with Moon and Mars, it can lead us to wonder, did the soul in question here feel nurtured? The Sun making that waxing sesquisquadrate to Saturn. Here again, was she throwing in upon herself a lot, having to supply her own needs? The activity from past lives can be naturally expressed, or it can be the woundedness as well. When I say it's been highly developed in past lives, it doesn't mean naturally expressed. It could be the patriarchal distortions as well. Maybe the trine from Pluto made it different. Volunteer, if you would, unmute yourself and again, just start giving me some feedback from what you have heard me say. What feels accurate? What feels, what's different?
I definitely had to supply my own emotional needs as a child. I did not have anyone there. I wasn't aware of that until later in life, but when I had to do a lot of work to fix that. But no.
Mm-hmm.
No,
So,
no.
so
I had my grandmother, but it wasn't. I mean, she was my safe to go to person, but she didn't really give. I mean, she gave me. I had a huge family, so I got a lot of love from everybody around, but from parent figures or adult figures that were supposed to teach me emotional needs, I did not have.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes. And so the activity of Leo intercepted in the fourth was you having, again, learning how to supply your own emotional needs. How old were you when you started figuring that out? Adolescence, adulthood?
I don't know when I became aware of it. I was always so alone, I guess. I don't know. Also being Aquarius, that archetype. So I was independent and was very quickly off doing my own thing,
Mm-hmm,
learning
mm-hmm,
lessons in life, being my own, experiencing emotions in my own way,
mm-hmm,
living and
mm-hmm.
learning.
Yeah. So I have a tendency to think that there's probably past life patterning in which, again, this is not the first lifetime in which you have had to learn to love, Leo, yourself on emotional levels. And perhaps that ruler sun waxing trine to Pluto, even though you weren't quite cognitively conscious of it, you had an ability to analyze sixth house Pluto, to discern sixth house, objectify sun in Aquarius. You were figuring it out even though you didn't know that's what you were doing.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so then as you moved into young adulthood and your maturation process, has it become more and more conscious for you that it's your responsibility to deeply love yourself on inner levels?
Only when I gave birth to my first child did I finally realize the importance of that. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That would be one of the deepest natural expressions of that Leo intercepted in that fourth house. If I may ask Linda, I forgot how much time I have, and so I can speed up. Would you let me know, Linda, when my cutoff is?
Yes, look, there's no need to speed up. You can take your time because we don't have a meeting after yours today.
Okay, all right. I think about 15, 20 more minutes for those of you who are on the call. So now we're going to look at these at the planetary or interception, and in this case, our Leo Aquarius example. And we're going to look to see if there are any planets or points intercepted. And of course, you can see this right off the bat. You already have seen it from the previous slides. As I had said before, sometimes when I see the sun in an intercepted sign, I go, oh, I think that that could be active in past lives because of the strength of the sun. I look for Pluto in the nodes because it's the karmic axis from evolutionary astrology's teachings. And in this example, we have both. And so just looking at these points alone, without the aspects from those two planetary rulers, we might be able to observe and correlate that this was pretty active before as well. Now, because we've already looked at the ruler Uranus being square these nodes, I'm going to bring that in too, even though I don't specifically have it up here on this slide, because it's hard not to put that in as part of the nodal axis when that exists. We've already looked somewhat at the sun, but if we start to put it together with Mercury and with that south node in Aquarius, can you start to see how this Aquarian intercepted in the 10th? It's going to lead us. Now, this soul in her year or so of specifically studying evolutionary astrology, again, has started to observe that she feels being that third stage individuated. And to recap for anybody new, that is where that is known as the Uranian phase of the soul's expansion in consciousness. That individuated state of consciousness for souls is rebelling against consensus. And third stage individuated is where we start to integrate it. It's where the ego, we still can have a center of gravity based upon the ego versus spirituated, where we start to develop center of gravity within the soul. We can still have it from an egoic point of view, all right? But the ego really starts to integrate itself in third stage individuated. It's kind of like, this is who I am and this is who I'm not. And I've got to be me, and I'm going to have the courage to be me, and I'm going to be comfortable in my own skin, no matter who I am via gender or race or country or beliefs or environmental conditionings in whatever way I've experienced. And so from that evolutionary state of consciousness, third individuated, that's the perspective, if we know that starting off, that we start to look at. If we don't know it, then we start asking questions. And over time, as evolutionary astrologers, we start to go, consensus, not a rebellion here. Is that second stage individuated? Or maybe some beautiful spiritual teachings, are they first stage spirituated? It's not anything that's magic that you instantly need to know, and you don't always need to know it. You just observe, correlate, and interact with the soul and allow it to naturally unfold however it does in any live interaction. So thanks for my little caveats there. As we look at the fact that this soul feels she's third stage individuated, that will then lead us into going, well, there could be some Aquarian rebellions going on from 10th house consensus, 10th house Capricorn archetype. And so what we have is the nodal axis is balsamic Mercury. It is balsamic Sun. I always compare the nodes to a planet. And so there will be periodic circumstances and events in this soul's lifetime where things came up from the past, South Node, and she did not feel like she fit in. And to some degree, she had to find her voice. And to some degree, she had to say, and I must be me. I must express myself differently than my environmental conditionings and my familial and societal background specifically. Now, Mercury is new phase, that Sun. And so here, this points towards finding that voice even more. Just Mercury 10 degrees past the Sun, she's had a lifetime or two of learning how to speak up, regardless of whether it was different or not accepted or weird or even the Aquarian lightning bolt, where it's kind of like the message comes in about the future, and can she speak up and actually express it, or can she recognize it, Mercury, and follow through on it? How strong is that tug from the past to not speak up because she doesn't want to experience trauma again? Let me bring in volunteer again. I'm just expressing some of these archetypes as how they may be from your environmental conditionings. Feedback from you?
Yeah, I was faced all my life against consensus and I didn't know that that's what was happening, and I had no question in my heart that I had to go in the other direction. Every time it was faced against me until today, in this life that I live here in this country, where it's, you know, a Jewish country with Jewish people, and I come and say, no, I'm not going to become Jewish just to be here. I mean, yeah, it's been and it's not a question. It's not even something that I have to struggle. I know deep within that it's nothing. It's just what it is. So I've always been in situations where I've had to rebel against the consensus without doing it, you know, with passion. It just happens.
Yes. Now, if I may, just quickly, I want to point out, if you were more along first stage individuated, the Aquarian energy could be more intercepted and unexpressed, and the 10th house energy could be stronger. You perhaps wouldn't speak up against the difference, the religious differences. The fact that you yourself just expressed, I'm living in an entire country with a specific religion, and I'm going, no, no, no. That right there was a very strong clue between first stage, individuated, I'm going to pretend that I'm not different, and third stage individuated, going, I am different, and let me tell you how.
Mm-hmm.
Got
And
that?
I'm raising children in this country, and I teach them as well that this is just a word that people use. It doesn't mean who you are. I mean, it's deep. Yeah, that's my role right now in this life, is to show people that we all have different opinions, and yeah.
That's a good point. Leading into, let's look at Leo intercepted in that fourth house. And there are no planets there, but we have some planets opposing that, and we have that north node there. You yourself just expressed something in which you said, and correct me if I heard you wrong. It's important to you to teach your two children that religion is just a word, etc. With what you said, or do you teach with children? Correct me.
No, I teach my own children, because there's a
Got it.
lot of questions that come up. Mom, if you're not Jewish, we're not Jewish, and I have to explain the whole incident. That
Do you homeschool your children?
I do not.
Okay. All right. No worries. My point is sparking off of you that Leo's children and intercepted in the fourth house. And so and this is true of all of us, but I'm just hearing from you that it is so important to you to teach your children, to nurture your children to be different. I mean, if you think on that Leo intercepted in the fourth house, it can be, I've got to stand up for my children and love them and nurturing as I see best, and as how I wish I would have been nurtured. You know, you could be a mama bear in that regard. And so, you know, here again, what I would like to point out is this intercepted sign in all of the archetypes that go along with it. There is what I sense a fairly strong energy to express herself emotionally, and to then be strong in her nurturing of her own children. Would that be accurate for you, volunteer?
Absolutely, yes, very much so.
Anything that sparks for you that you want to add on to what I'm saying?
No, no.
Okay, all right. Do you feel this has been helpful for you in working and understanding intercepted signs a little better?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, all right, all right. I'll, out of out of curiosity's sake, I'm going to open a can of worms. I did not look up your house in the house system you typically use. Do you have different intercepted houses in a different house system?
Yes.
We'll save that conversation for another day at another class. Thank you for allowing me to use potpourri. If we had 2 hours, we could go all over it, but we better be careful for the sake of time. But what I would like to do now is bring your environmental conditionings back in, and I'd like to bring in your entire chart and volunteer. I'd like you to be able to ask questions on anything within the chart, and I'm always going to make it germane to what we're working with today. And I'd also like to invite anybody who is live on this webinar to ask any questions of anything we've spoken about so far today. So volunteer. Well, I'll start with you. Any questions or anything?
No, not at this time. No.
Okay. All right. Then, yeah, you bet. You're most welcome. And you're welcome to mute yourself, but if anything comes through in the next, you know, few minutes with other questions, by all means, you are always welcome to interrupt and give feedback, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Anybody else who is live on the call, we can bring in the entire chart now. Anything anybody wants to ask, any comments with your own interpretations that may have been popping up for you?
I have a question, something I'm curious about.
Mm-hmm.
How would, if a planet is retrograde within that,
let's say, for instance, I think I know your question. If there's a planet in the intercepted signs and that planet is retrograde, for instance, in this chart, what if Mercury was retrograde? It would emphasize the rebellion of throwing off those archetypes by sign and house even more. It would lead me to question whether or not that intercepted sign was active right off the bat just because of a planetary retrograde. It's a very good point, Wanda. Thank you. And so in this case, if Mercury was retrograde, you know, we could maybe have had a soul who was, you know, arguing back with mom and dad from, you know, real young age. I don't agree with this, or I don't agree with that. And you know, it would, in this case, if that Mercury in Aquarius was retrograde, it would point her even more towards that polarity, Leo, fourth house, and move her forward even faster in her own emotional self-development, especially if she was individuating or spirituating states of consciousness. If, for instance, in this chart, Mercury was retrograde and we were dealing with consensus state of consciousness, we could have a soul who could be perhaps quite traumatized and have no voice because the consensus conditionings, 10th house, were so strong. Or perhaps that Mercury retrograde conjunct the South Node, there was a degree of persecution in past lives that they would just go, I can't speak up, I'll be hurt. And it could be a delayed development before they would speak up. And that's where it starts to get into some subtle observation correlation, because it could still be highly active in that consensus state, that they didn't know how to verbalize it. It was there on some level, but they didn't know how to verbally express it. The energy, the archetype was there. Make sense? Good question.
Yes, it does make sense. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And if I may, if you remember when we were looking at the ruler of Leo, which is the sun, and the fact that the moon was approaching a waning in conjunct, and Mars is retrograde, approaching a waning in conjunct, but see how tight it is. Mars is 13, Virgo 8, Sun is 13, Aquarius 58, so it's less than a degree approaching that waning in conjunct. Waxing in conjuncts are inner adjustments. Waning in conjuncts are usually outer adjustments, typically with relationships in some way. If not relationships, the outer world, outer adjustments. Waning in conjunct, outer adjustments. There could be situations in the early childhood and early nurturing, and the middle child between two brothers in a military family. And Volunteer, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm guessing when you said all military family members, that both brothers went into the military following dad. You know, can you imagine all of this male energy coming at her when she could have had a lot of emotional sensitivity? And the ruler of that fourth house, moon, is in this waning in conjunct as well. Okay, this starts to bring in a whole nother picture to sixth house Pluto, 4 planets in Virgo, 3 of them retrograde. This is a lot of that internalization that would just go on for a sixth house Pluto, when others came at her seeming to be stronger. Mars, more authoritarian or stronger. Mars, Saturn, you know, do as we say, not as we do. Jupiter. And yet we have all this sensitivity that's there from that moon. And this could intensify those feelings of, why am I different? Why am I not like the rest of my family members? Why don't I follow through with all the conditioning and go in the military? It could intensify a lot of this emotional energy, and again, individuating, spirituating, it would turn her in on herself to ponder all of these Virgo planets and those aspects to that ruler sun with a 6th house Pluto. Now, those planets retrograde, even though they're not intercepted in Aquarius Leo, those planets retrograde helped her throw off that conditioning and helped her with the Virgo 5th saying, I can't do this, gotta be me. Gotta do that Aquarian break free from the consensus. I gotta honor how different I feel emotionally. Is that accurate, volunteer?
I think more, but I looked at them and said, they're all crazy.
Yeah.
Turn into what they are.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But yeah, you're right.
Good question. Thank you, Wanda. Anybody else? Any thing that we're looking at today?
I'll venture a question.
Sure.
I actually have the same intercepted signs and houses as your volunteer. And I have Pluto in Leo intercepted in the 4th and Aquarius in the 10th. What I want to know is if you have the ruler of Leo, the sun, as a skip step, would you consider that more an indication of active or underdeveloped?
Yes, it's not. The general rule is that the more aspects you see, the more there is going on. So the more active it is. And when you say sun skip step, you mean you have sun square the nodes, okay?
Right.
And so even though we look at planets square the nodes as having some arrested development, one of the original Jeffrey Wolf Green teachings was that the sun square the nodes was not a typical skip step. And this again is because the sun is the center of the solar system. It is the life force for everything that is alive on planet Earth. So how I've looked at sun square the nodes is that energy, that creativity bounces back and forth between the nodes, but it's still expressed. It may not just be consistently expressed. Now, bringing it back to your question, okay, with the nodes in Aquarius, Leo, 10th, 4th, Pluto, Leo, intercepted in that 4th, and ruler sun, square the nodes. Again, we're going to go for activity. There's more going on. So I would have a tendency to think that those intercepted signs were active in past lives. And especially being a Pluto and Leo.
Yeah, that's right.
It'd be
the sun has 7 aspects to it, so that would.
Yeah. Okay. There you go. And so you have sun square the nodes, but you have sun with many or several aspects as well. So that goes back to some of our earlier slides showing that. And by the way, Pluto intercepted in any sign is just going to be. To me, it's almost like that intercepted sign is squeezing and concentrating that energy. And from EA's perspective, when it's Pluto the soul, I mean, who of you who have studied EA think your soul isn't alive or active? It may be unconscious, but boy, once you start learning the language of evolutionary astrology, you all recognize your own soul is pretty darn intense, correct?
Yeah. Thank you very much. That totally makes sense.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Anyone else? All right. Thank you. I appreciate the questions and the interactions on the end. I just have one more slide, and very quickly, EA Zoom has graciously invited me to be on their December 19th conversation with many astrologers, and mine is, what about the waxing Uranus-Pluto biseptiles? All right. Thank you so much, everyone at EA Zoom. I love coming on and sharing with you. And to everybody who attended live or anybody who watches afterwards, thank you very much. All the best with your evolutionary astrology studies.
Thank you so much, Kim Marie. That was absolutely fabulous. And I'm sure all of us will agree with that. So would you all please unmute yourselves and thank Kim Marie.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. You're all most welcome, and thank you to our volunteer. Adios, everyone.